I didn't find out about the loans in a dramatic way. No shouting. No calls in the middle of the night. No sudden panic. It was just another envelope in my mailbox. White. Plain. Heavy. I stood there for a moment, keys still in my hand, staring at my name printed neatly on the front. James Carter. I almost put it back. At 65, you learn not to panic over mail. Half of it isn't even meant for you. Credit offers, scam letters, things you'll never use. But something about this one made me pause. I opened it. Before you see what happens next in my life, subscribe to this channel. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your identity or money, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you think to know you're not alone. My name is James Carter. I'm 65 years old. I've lived a simple life. Worked hard, raised my kids, paid my bills, and tried to stay honest. I'm not perfect, but I've never been reckless with money. The letter said I owed money. Not a small amount. A lot. At first I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible. I honestly thought someone had mixed up files. Maybe another James Carter. There are plenty of us. Then I read it again. 3 loans. Different banks. Different dates. All under my name. I sat down at the kitchen table and let the paper rest in front of me. That table had been with me for decades. Coffee stains. Small burns from hot plates. One leg slightly shorter than the rest. I had fixed that table so many times, just like I fixed everything else in my life instead of replacing it. I hadn't taken a loan in years. I didn't like debt. Never did. Even when my kids were growing up and money was tight, I avoided borrowing whenever I could. After my wife passed away, I became even more careful. One income. One person. No safety net. I picked up the phone and called the bank. The woman on the other end sounded calm. Professional. Like this was routine. She asked for my date of birth. Then my social security number. Then my address. Everything matched. She told me the loans were approved using my identification. My documents. My information. I told her it wasn't me. She didn't accuse me. She didn't comfort me either. Sir, according to our system, the documents appear valid, she said. Valid. I ended the call and sat there for a long time. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No television. No radio. Just the refrigerator humming and the clock ticking on the wall. I pulled out my old files. Tax papers. Bank statements. Insurance documents. Everything was clean. Everything made sense. Then I checked my credit report. That's when my chest tightened. Late payments. Missed payments. Accounts I didn't recognize. My credit score, something I had protected my whole life, was ruined. I felt embarrassed before I felt angry. At my age, you're supposed to be past this. You're supposed to be stable. Secure. Done with surprises. I started thinking back. Who had access to my documents? Who knew my information? Who had helped me fill out online forms after my wife died? The answer made my stomach sink. My kids. I trusted them. Completely. Copies of my ID. Old paperwork. Passwords written down. Just in case. They said they were helping me stay organized. I never questioned it. Why would I? They were my family. I told myself there had to be another explanation. There always is. Mistakes happen. Systems fail. People get confused. Anything but what my gut was starting to accept. I picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't call the bank. I called my son. He answered on the 4th ring. His voice sounded normal. Too normal. Hey Dad, he said. Like this was just another call about groceries or a doctor's appointment. I asked him if he had a few minutes. He said he was busy driving. That he'd talk fast. I didn't accuse him. Not yet. I told him about the letter, the loans, and the banks calling me a borrower when I knew I wasn't. There was a pause. Not a surprised pause. Not a confused one. Just a pause. Then he laughed. Softly. Like I had misunderstood something small. Dad, he said, you're probably reading it wrong. Those things are confusing. That was the first crack. I told him the banks had my social security number. My address. My signature. He sighed. Loudly. Like I was being difficult. Why are you stressing yourself like this? He said. You always do that. You overthink. Overthink. I had worked 38 years without missing a mortgage payment. I had buried my wife without asking anyone for help. But now I was overthinking. I asked him directly if he had used my name for anything. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, Dad, we'll talk later. This isn't the right time. And he hung up. I sat there holding the phone long after the call ended. That's when the anger started to creep in. Slow. Quiet. The kind that doesn't explode right away but settles deep in your chest. I called my daughter next. She answered quickly. Too quickly. Like she'd been holding the phone already. I told her about the letters. The loans. The credit report. There was silence on the line. Not shock. Not confusion. Just silence. Then she said, Dad, you're probably mistaken. That hurt more than yelling would have. I told her the banks had confirmed everything. I told her the loans were real. I told her they were destroying my credit. She got irritated. Why are you making this about you? She asked. We're your kids. That sentence changed something in me. I asked her whose signature was on the documents. She said they signed for me. Said it was easier that way. Said everyone does it. Everyone. I asked her what would happen if they didn't pay. She went quiet. Then she said, You're not going to the police, are you? That's when I realized something important. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about themselves. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying conversations from the past. Moments I ignored. Times they rushed me through paperwork. Told me not to worry. I remembered my son saying, Dad, trust me. I had. The next morning, the calls started. Unknown numbers. Voicemails. Final notices. I felt ashamed. Even answering the phone felt heavy. Like I had done something wrong. I went to the bank in person. I sat across from a man half my age who explained my situation using polite words and rehearsed sympathy. Fraud investigation. Disputes. Time. A lot of time. In the meantime, the loans were still mine. Legally. I asked him what would happen if the payments stopped. He didn't sugarcoat it. Lawsuits. Liens. Garnishments. I walked out of that bank feeling smaller than I had in years. When I got home, my son was waiting in my driveway. He said we needed to talk. Like a family. He told me I was overreacting. Said I was embarrassing them. Said if I went legal, I'd destroy their lives. He didn't ask how I was doing. He asked what I was going to do. That night, sitting alone in my house, I finally understood something. They didn't see me as their father anymore. They saw me as a solution. And solutions are disposable. I looked around the house. At everything I had built. Everything I had protected. And for the first time, I stopped thinking like a father. I started thinking like a man who needed to protect himself. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to go outside. Not because I was afraid. Not because I wanted to hide. I just needed to breathe without hearing the phone ring, without wondering what new trouble awaited me in the mailbox. But it didn't last. By mid-morning, my son called again. Dad, seriously, calm down, he said, almost impatient. I told him I couldn't calm down. My credit was destroyed. My name was being used without my permission. The banks had confirmed it. He laughed this time. A short, nervous chuckle. Dad, you're blowing this out of proportion. I froze, blowing it out of proportion. I had worked my entire life, saved what I could, built a home with my hands, and now they were telling me I was imagining it all. I told him calmly, "It's not imagination. It's real. And I need answers." He paused. And then the words hit me like a punch. "We did what we had to do, Dad. You wouldn't understand." I gritted my teeth. "Did you use my name?" "Yes," he said flatly. "We borrowed money under your name. But we're going to pay it back. Don't worry about that." The anger started to burn in me, slow and steady. "Not worry?" I asked. "Do you know what you've done to my credit? My life?" He sighed. Loudly. Like it was my problem. "Look, we were drowning. It was temporary." "You don't get it," he said. "Temporary." The word repeated in my head, echoing in the quiet kitchen. Temporary. As if destroying someone's life was just a passing inconvenience. I hung up. Then I called my daughter. She answered immediately. Too quickly. I tried to be careful with my words. Calm. Neutral. The banks confirmed it. The loans are in my name. The signature is mine. She didn't react with shock. Not with remorse. Just matter of fact. "Dad, we did what was necessary," she said. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We just needed a way to fix things. You would have said no if we asked?" I could feel my hands shake. "You used my name. Without asking. That's fraud. That's illegal. Do you even realize what you've done?" Her voice hardened. "You're making this about yourself, Dad. You're embarrassing us. People will talk. Don't make it worse than it already is." Embarrassing them. Not the loans. Not the theft. Me. I was the problem. For a long while, I didn't know what to say. Then I told her the truth. My credit was ruined. Collectors were calling. Some banks had already started charging penalties. My financial life, my reputation, was in pieces. There was silence on the line. Finally, she said, "Well, you should have protected your information better." I sat there. My daughter, the person I had trusted most, blamed me for being a victim of my own children. I couldn't breathe. I ended the call. I walked around the house. The walls seemed closer. The room smaller. Every picture, every memory, now felt like a reminder that nothing was as it seemed. I went through my files again. Everything clean. Everything accounted for. And yet, legally, I was responsible. The calls continued. Unknown numbers. Threatening letters. The occasional polite notice. I felt trapped in my own home, in my own life. I decided to go back to the bank. This time in person. The man behind the counter, polite, young, professional, explained that fraud investigations take time. Weeks, sometimes months. Evidence needs to be collected. Statements signed. Verification done. I nodded. My chest heavy. Inside, I felt like a man drowning, only I was already on land. I had nothing to hold on to. "You'll have to provide full documentation," he said. "Bank statements, identification, any proof that these loans were not yours." I nodded again. My hand gripped the folder tighter. The weight of betrayal was heavier than any financial burden. When I came home, my son was waiting in the driveway. "Dad, we need to talk," he said. "Not about the loans, or about what happened. Just, we need to talk." He told me I was overreacting. Said I was being dramatic. That if I went legal, I'd destroy their lives. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just listened. And then I realized, this wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about credit. It was about control. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I represented. My name. My stability. My trust. I started keeping notes. Every call. Every word. Every detail. Names. Dates. times, conversations. I knew I needed evidence. But more than that, I needed clarity. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying moments from the past. When I handed over copies of my ID. When I helped them with forms. When I believed they were simply being responsible. Every memory was tainted now. But something inside me shifted. I realized I had a choice. I could crumble. I could let this destroy me. Or I could start protecting myself. Slowly. Carefully. Methodically. The next morning, I locked my filing cabinet for the first time in years. Changed passwords. Closed shared accounts. Took back control of things I should have protected sooner. When my son saw it, he stormed in. Accusations. Anger. Threats. "You're choosing money over family," he yelled. I listened quietly. When he finished, I said one sentence. "You used my name without asking." No shouting. No pleading. Just the truth. He had no answer. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of relief. I realized then. I wasn't just fighting for money or credit. I was fighting for my dignity. My life. My sense of self. And that fight was mine. The days that followed were heavy in a way that silence can be. No shouting. No crashing. No big scenes. Just quiet. And waiting. My son stopped coming over. My daughter sent short, clipped messages. Polite. Cold. The kind of words you send to someone you no longer feel close to. Each day, I felt the weight of their betrayal settling deeper. Not like a bruise you can see, but a quiet ache that creeps into your chest and never fully leaves. I spent hours at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of documents I had gathered. Copies of letters, emails, call logs, every note I had started keeping late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Each piece a reminder, they had used my name. They had crossed every line I had trusted them not to cross. One afternoon, I received a letter from the bank marked, "Urgent, fraud investigation update." My hands didn't shake this time. Not even a little. The bank confirmed that the signatures on the loans were not mine. That the loans had been taken without my consent. For a moment, relief washed over me. And then reality hit. That didn't automatically fix anything. The banks needed more proof. Timelines. Statements. Witnesses. My children would have to be named in the investigation. I read that line over and over. My children. The people I had trusted most in the world. My own blood. The very ones who had promised to protect me. I realized then that I had been naive. I had assumed loyalty by birthright, and for that assumption, I had paid dearly. I signed the forms the bank sent me. Every word a small victory in reclaiming control. Every sentence a step toward justice. When my son found out, he stormed into the house. Anger and desperation twisted across his face. "You're destroying the family!" he yelled. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond with emotion. I had spent weeks cultivating patience, gathering evidence, preparing myself. I said simply, "You signed my name without asking. That's not about family. That's about fraud." He fumed. He called me selfish. He accused me of choosing money over family. I listened. Quietly. And when he was done, I said one sentence. "You did what you did. Now face the consequences." That night, I walked the house alone. Every room, every memory, every photograph felt different. Holidays, birthdays, smiles frozen in old pictures, they were all reminders that I had been used. That my trust had been exploited. But in that quiet walk, I also realized something else. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't a victim. I had documents. I had evidence. I had the law on my side. And, most importantly, I had my mind intact, clear, and unclouded by excuses for their behavior. The investigation moved slowly, painfully. Weeks turned into months. Calls from the bank, questions from lawyers, letters demanding more evidence. But every step forward was a small victory. I learned to detach from the chaos my children had caused. I stopped checking the mail compulsively. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I spent my mornings walking around the neighborhood, watching people go about their lives, realizing that mine would go on too. One evening, my daughter showed up at the front door unannounced. Her eyes were red, and I could see real tears, or at least what she wanted me to believe were real tears. "Dad," she said, "things got out of hand. I never meant for it to hurt you." I nodded. No words. I had nothing to say. "Please don't ruin us over paperwork," she pleaded. Paperwork. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell that this wasn't about paperwork. It wasn't about money. It was about trust. It was about betrayal. But I didn't. I just walked her to the door and closed it behind her. The next day, I met with my lawyer. I almost canceled the appointment 3 times. Part of me still hoped this could be fixed with a conversation. That they would apologize, admit it was wrong, and make it right. But the lawyer listened, nodding, not interrupting. Then he said something that stuck with me. "Being a father doesn't mean being a victim." He explained my options carefully. None of them easy. All of them necessary. For the first time, I realized that being kind and trusting had limits. That sometimes protecting yourself required firm boundaries, even if it hurt those you loved. I went home and changed everything. Passwords. Account numbers. Security questions. Locks on filing cabinets. Every small thing that could be used against me. When my son discovered this, he exploded. Threats. Yelling. Accusations. "You're tearing the family apart," he shouted. I didn't reply with emotion. I had already stopped being a reactive father. I had become a man who protected himself. I simply said, "You used my name. Now you face the consequences." No shouting. No pleading. Just truth. And for the first time in weeks, I slept well. I realized then that this wasn't just about loans or credit. It was about reclaiming my life. My dignity. My self-respect. I didn't hate my children. Not truly. But I stopped excusing them. I stopped protecting them from their own mistakes. Every morning, I walked through the house, observing the life I had built, the work I had done, the integrity I had maintained for decades. And I knew, for the first time, that even if the relationship with my children remained fractured, I still had myself. This was the turning point. Not dramatic, not loud. But it was mine. I had realized that being a father does not obligate you to be exploited. Being a father does not mean ignoring your own rights, your own safety, your own future. Sometimes, the hardest lesson in life is learning when to stop being a father and start being a man again. And I had finally learned it. The silence after the confrontation was almost deafening. Not because my children weren't around. They were there, but in a different way. They no longer called to check on me. They sent brief, clipped messages, each one carefully measured so it wouldn't reveal too much of their guilt or their fear. The house felt different. Not physically, but emotionally. Every room seemed smaller, every shadow heavier. I walked through the living room and paused in front of a photograph of my wife and me, taken years ago at a beach we used to love. I remembered that day vividly. The sun was bright, the water calm, and she held my hand, smiling like the world couldn't touch us. And for a moment, I wished she were still here. I wished she could see what had happened. Not the loans. Not the bank calls. Not the ruined credit. She had always taught me that family mattered, but she also believed in integrity. And what my children had done was the opposite of that. One afternoon, I received another letter from the bank, marked "Final Review, Fraud Confirmation." I unfolded it slowly. My hands didn't tremble this time. I had learned control. The letter confirmed everything. The loans had been taken without my consent. The signatures were forged. The banks had initiated corrective measures. My credit would be restored. But it wasn't celebration I felt. It was quiet. A slow, steady realization that the legal battle was just one part. The emotional damage, the breach of trust, that was mine to carry. And maybe that would never fully heal. The lawyer called shortly after. He explained the next steps: documentation for correction, statements to finalize, and the possibility of legal action against my children if necessary. I listened, nodded, agreed. It was time to accept that my role as a father had limits. I could guide, teach, and protect, but I could not shield them from the consequences of their actions. Later that evening, my daughter came to the house. Unannounced. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of guilt had finally caught up with her. "Dad," she said softly, her voice trembling. I didn't think it would go this far. I never wanted to hurt you." I studied her carefully. Every word she said, every pause, every tremor in her voice. I didn't respond immediately. "Please," she said, "don't make this worse. Don't ruin us." "Paperwork." I didn't answer. I let the silence speak for me. The next morning, I met with my lawyer again. This time, we went over the final steps. Evidence had been submitted. Banks were cooperating. Everything was in motion. I left the office feeling a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. Relief because my name would be cleared. Exhaustion because I had realized that sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you the most. Back at home, I started to reorganize. Filing cabinets, passwords, bank statements, locked drawers. Every small thing that could be misused again was now secured. When my son discovered these changes, he exploded. Anger, frustration, threats. "You're tearing the family apart," he shouted. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said calmly, "You used my name without asking. Now you face the consequences." His face twisted with disbelief, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of calm. I realized that this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about reclaiming my life. The following weeks were quiet. Slowly, the banks corrected the records. My credit score, damaged but recoverable, began to climb back up. Collectors stopped calling. Letters stopped arriving. I spent my mornings walking outside, taking long routes through my neighborhood, watching people go about their lives, realizing mine would go on too. Evenings, I sat by the window, reflecting. The house was still mine. The walls still stood. The photographs remained. But the feeling of family, as it had been, was gone. I thought about my wife, about what she would have said. I imagined her hand on mine, her voice soft, saying, "You did what you had to do." And that thought brought me peace. I began to understand that protecting yourself doesn't make you cold or selfish. It makes you human. Every night I wrote in my journal. Notes about the day. Reflections on what had happened. Plans for moving forward. Slowly, I started to reclaim not just my credit, but my sense of self. My children sent occasional messages. Polite. Regretful, maybe. But they never truly apologized. And I didn't need them to. I had learned to find strength in silence. In boundaries. In honesty with myself. I stopped waiting for them to acknowledge their wrongs. I stopped hoping for validation from people who had already chosen a different path. Instead, I focused on what I could control. My home. My health. My peace of mind. I realized that life doesn't always give you closure in the way you want it. Sometimes, closure comes quietly, in the decisions you make for yourself. And that was enough. I finally understood that my role as a father didn't obligate me to be used, to be exploited, to be silenced. I could love, and I could forgive, but I also had the right to protect my dignity. And so I did. The house felt quieter than it had in months. Not because anyone had left physically. My son and daughter were still in town, still living their lives, still going about their routines. It was quiet because the chaos, the manipulation, the fear, it was gone. I made my coffee that morning and sat by the window. The sun poured in softly, warm on my hands. Outside, neighbors were moving about, children laughing, dogs barking, life going on. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The fraud investigation had finally concluded. The banks cleared my name. My credit score, though not perfect, had begun to recover. Every statement, every document, every notice that had once carried panic now felt like old news. But more important than any of that was the realization that I had reclaimed something far more valuable: my self-respect. I remembered all the moments that had brought me here, the laughter I had shared with my wife, the small joys of raising my children, the trust one had given them. And I acknowledged the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the quiet anger that had burned for weeks, sometimes threatening to consume me. I didn't hate my children. Not truly. I mourned the innocence of the relationship we once had, but I didn't let that mourning turn into bitterness. A few days later, my son sent a text message. Short. Hesitant. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply immediately. When I finally typed, I wrote only, "I hope you learned something." I hit send. And then I put the phone down. No more explanations. No more pleading. No more emotional negotiations. The house had my attention again. I started repairing the things I had neglected in the chaos, small things that brought comfort. The wobbly kitchen chair, the leaky faucet, the rusted gate. Every small repair reminded me that some things were mine to fix, and some things, no matter how much I loved them, were not mine to control. Evenings were my favorite now. I sat on the porch with a blanket, watching the sky turn gold, and then deep blue. The world felt slow and manageable again. I thought often about my wife. What she would have said. I imagined her hand on mine, her voice gentle but firm. "You did what you had to do. You protected yourself. That's enough." Her imagined words brought real comfort. I also thought about forgiveness. Not forgiveness for the sake of reconciliation, not forgiveness that ignored wrongdoing, but forgiveness that freed me from carrying the weight of their mistakes. I forgave them, not for them, but for me. I allowed myself to be at peace. To walk through my home without the constant tension that had filled every corner. To check the mail without fear. To sleep without waking in panic, imagining creditors and letters and the endless spiral of lies. I realized that life doesn't always offer dramatic resolutions. It doesn't always give you apologies or hugs or happy endings. Sometimes, closure comes quietly, in the decisions you make for yourself. And that was enough for me. I began to embrace a different kind of life. One where I could enjoy small things without fear. A quiet morning with a cup of coffee. A walk in the neighborhood. Reading a book without the background noise of worry. Talking to neighbors and friends without the gnawing sense that life could be stolen from me at any moment. I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. I learned that protecting yourself doesn't make you heartless. It makes you human. And sometimes the hardest lessons in life are the ones that teach you when to stop being a parent and start being a person again. I didn't need my children to understand me. I didn't need their validation or acknowledgement. I needed only to stand firm, to know my boundaries, to live honestly and with integrity. And in that I found strength. The house, once filled with tension and betrayal, now held calm. My hands, which had once trembled holding papers of ruin, now moved confidently, repairing, organizing, reclaiming. I knew the scars of betrayal would remain. I knew there would be moments when I would remember the letters, the lies, the stolen trust, and feel that old ache. But I also knew something else. I had survived. I had reclaimed my life. I had discovered that dignity, self-respect, and honesty are worth more than any apology or recognition from those who choose a different path. And so I moved forward quietly, steadily, peacefully. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to prove a point. The world already knew, and more importantly, I knew. I was James Carter. 65 years old. A father, yes, but also a man who refused to be a victim of betrayal. And that was enough.